And welcome back to Eli's High School Report. Paul Beatty here on the Eli and the NFHS Sports Network. And great privilege to welcome our guest for this week's podcast. And it is former State Attorney General Rob McKenna, candidate for governor as well, in a tight race. I think a lot of people may not remember, Rob, that you and current Governor Jay Inslee faced off, and it was a very tight race. It could be you sitting there looking for your third term right now. But,
well, file that one under be careful what you wish for. It's pretty challenging times in that right now to be in government. So my hat's off to anyone who's currently serving, and regardless of their political party. It's a very challenging time.
No question about it. It is a really tough time, which kind of brings us to why would we bring on a former attorney general for the state to talk about high school sports? But I have to give credit to Tim Martinez. He's a columnist with the Columbian down in Vancouver. And he wrote a story or a column just a week ago about this very subject. Well, why are Washington kids not able to play sports? And that's actually number two. Number one is, why can't they all be back in class and things like that? And the word that kept coming up was liability. And I think sometimes we take it, there's liability. But I wanted to find out, okay, what does that actually mean? And I think a lot of people, the short conversation we had to set up this interview, you stunned me with what this state requires. Let's start from the beginning here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And that is just how liability, in other words, I think a lot of people would be under the misconception that liability law or something is the same in all 50 states across the country. Everyone does it the same. That's the first mistake, right?
Right. It's a mistake to assume that every state is the same. Our state is on the far end of the bell curve. We're in the most extreme position when it comes to the liability of taxpayers for personal injury claims filed against state government and local governments. That's because, like other states, we waived immunity from such suits called sovereign immunity. Unlike other states, we waived it completely, and a series of state Supreme Court decisions dating back to the 70s has moved the goalpost even farther out, making it easier to sue governments in our state to obtain recoveries for injuries. And it's important to understand that one of the key reasons our state pays out so much more than any other state in the country on a proportionate basis, per capita basis, is that we have this rule called joint and several liability, which means that if the state or a local government, like a school district, is the co-defendant in a lawsuit, but the other co-defendant is broke, is an empty pocket. If the plaintiff can convince a jury that the government agency is just 1% at fault, they can recover 100% of their claim damages from that government agency. And so when I was in office, we were routinely paying out 10 times more per year than Idaho, 6 times more per year than Oregon. And we're a bigger state than Idaho and Oregon, but we're not that much bigger. We were paying out, if you want to compare Washington state to a comparably sized state, take Massachusetts. In those days, we were paying out 4 times more per year than Massachusetts in lawsuit settlements and judgments when cases went to trial. And this was a trend that went back many, many years to the 1970s. I inherited it. I tried to change it by going to the legislature to persuade them to put some reasonable safeguards or guardrails in place. I said, look, I'm not asking for Texas rules or Kansas. I'd be happy to have Massachusetts or California. And they wouldn't do it. So when we talk about COVID-19 and potential liability for high school sports and school districts that run them, it's a real concern. It's a real problem. And some other states are already moving to address it.
Right. So Rob, and I really want to take this one step at a time, because I think it's really important for people to understand. And this is not to convince anyone of anything. This is an education piece that I want people to understand how this works. So let me lay out a scenario, and you let me know if I'm correct. So under the and it's basically extreme liability, right? It's joint liability,
Right.
as you mentioned. And so if let's say that I am a person driving a car, and I don't have insurance, and I don't even have a license, and I'm just struggling to get by, and for some reason I run into a light pole, and the light pole drops a signal on a car, maybe damaging or injuring someone else. That person then, since I don't have insurance, would file a lawsuit. They would name me, and then they would also likely name the city, because maybe they claim that they should add a stronger bolt so that signal didn't fall. We go to court, and the jury agrees, says, yeah, you are 99% at fault in this. In the city, yeah, you probably could have done some maintenance, maybe had a stronger bolt. So we're going to give 1% against you. It's a $100,000 lawsuit. So I'm responsible for 99,000. I don't have a penny to my name. So you're telling me the city, with that 1%, supposed to be $1,000, now has to pay the entire $100,000. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, with one modification to your hypothetical. Imagine the lawsuit is brought not by the driver, but by his passenger.
Okay.
We do have a rule that there's an offset for the percentage of harm caused by, a plaintiff. So if the driver was 99% responsible, then there wouldn't be a claim for 100% because of his contribution to the accident. But if there were a passenger in the car, so-called innocent, claimant, then you're right. If the driver who was negligent was 99% at fault, but a jury says, yeah, that bolt, they should have put a bigger bolt in there to hold that light standard up, or that traffic signal up, then yeah, conceptually the local government can be held responsible to pay out 100% of the judgment, because the uninsured, broke driver is an empty pocket.
And that's kind of the empty pocket syndrome, so to speak. And that's why when you hear, and I think, I'm guessing that most people have not been through a civil suit process. If they have, it's been many times the insurance companies or other people take care of it, and you end up having to sign, but not really. I think that's still probably a lot of people that don't quite understand just how exactly that plays out.
Yeah.
And so kind of cleaning this up a little bit, there's a lot of us, and what I mean, I think of myself as a fairly regular person that has questions about things like that. So when we see school districts and other municipalities constantly settling, and it makes us mad, why don't you go to court and win some of these cases, and we won't have all these lawsuits? This is in direct response to that, isn't it? Is in many times that, because we're talking about 100,000, there are many suits that are millions of dollars. Right.
It is. I think our legal framework is a big part of the problem. Look, I think when the government messes up, they ought to pay. When I say they, it's really us, right? We're the source of government revenues, resources. But I also think that what taxpayers pay out should be proportionate to government's actual share of the liability. And I think that we need some other guardrails as well, but we don't have them in this state. The legislature has shown no desire to enact them, and so not only state government but local governments are really vulnerable to huge claims. And it's to the point where if you're a plaintiff's lawyer and you've got an injured client, if you don't think of some way to get a government agency on the hook for part of the responsibility, you're not doing your job. And so the name of the game, if you can, is to name the state or local government or both as co-defendants. So if I'm in a car that is in an accident and I sue the driver, I also want to sue the state if I'm on a state highway. I want to sue the local government if I'm on a city street to try to show that somehow they contributed to the accident. And that creates a different set of incentives than was originally intended when the state legislature waived immunity way back in the 60s.
Now, there are some things, as you mentioned, that the state legislature, this does not take a vote of the people. This is the state legislature can help fix some of this. Before I get to some of the solutions, what I'd like to do, because you ran through some really, I mean, when we're talking about high school sports and kids back in class specifically,
right.
The governor has now somewhat said it is now up to local jurisdictions and school districts to make their own decision. Well, that kind of puts them out there in no man's land, right, so to speak. So can you talk about, even though that the governor said you could do this, that with the guidelines that they've also put up, those guidelines can also be the hindrance as to actually wanting to move forward, because now there are guidelines, even though in the state said, here are the guidelines, you're now responsible for it, we are not.
That's right. Yeah. I think the schools are legitimately concerned that when they reopen for in-person instruction, they will, eventually be sued by someone who claims that they contracted COVID at the school, or they contracted COVID from somebody who was in the school, maybe from one of the students who brought it home. And they're not only concerned because of the claim the infection occurred in the school, but they're concerned because the plaintiff will come in and claim that they didn't follow the guidelines perfectly. Evidence that there wasn't a bottle of hand sanitizer in every classroom, that the students weren't observing social distancing all the time, that 4 students were observed not wearing their masks at one point during the school day, things like that. So what California has done to address this concern is to, basically put protections against liability in place for school districts. And it's a really common sense approach that they're taking. They're saying, if the school district is generally following the guidelines, doesn't have to be perfect, but is really making a good faith attempt to follow the guidelines for reopening, then they're not going to be liable if someone sues claiming that they contracted COVID from someone at the school or that were themselves at the school. That's I think a pretty common sense approach to it, and it gives the school districts more confidence. Keep in mind, Paul, as a lot of your listeners know, the state has been telling the schools that they're essentially essential facilities. They are basically essential facilities that they have to reopen when they're told to.
Right.
And some of them have been reopened for a while, acting as daycare centers and as other kinds of community centers. So they're being treated like essential facilities. If they're being treated like essential facilities, there needs to be some protection put in place, not to eliminate their responsibility to act responsibly, but to eliminate unfettered liability when someone can find a crack in the armor, can claim that they were harmed because they didn't follow all of the guidelines perfectly.
Now, it's one thing in the schools, and Rob, I know you're a sports guy too, as a head football coach, and they decided, and let's say that they decided, okay, let's go ahead and let's play football. We're going to start practicing today, and in 3 weeks we'll have our first game. How much preparation? I mean, what would you do as a head football coach with the knowledge you have as an attorney to know the ins and outs of this? I'm pretty sure most high school football coaches do not know all of the liability risks, and that is what's truly at stake by moving forward. There is a lot of stuff you have to think about. Yeah,
that's right. And I mean, let's start with the basic point that your number one responsibility and concern isn't legal liability. It's taking care of your players and your coaches and assistant coaches, right? You want to do the right thing by all of them. That's first. Second, I don't think any coach could handle the situation without a lot of support from the school district. I'm like all of us, I'm watching professional sports again, and I'm watching what's going on with plans to reopen the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and so forth. and I'm seeing organizations that have immense amounts of resources that are doing the one thing that is the most likely to prevent anyone from getting sick, and that is they're testing everybody constantly. So they're not letting anybody near the court or the field without having tested negative. That's the best way to protect. I'm not sure in terms of high school sports that, at least right now, school districts and football programs and other high school sports programs have the resources to manage that level of testing. If they could, that would be the way to do it. If they can't, then it's a matter of waiting until less expensive, faster testing is available more widely. And that's what we all need, right? Because the fastest way to knock this epidemic down, this pandemic down, to allow us all to get back to our normal lives would be frequent testing with instant results that are inexpensively available. And then we could all go back to work and our other activities, because we could confirm to ourselves and the people would be around that we're not infected.
And again, I think a great point there, Rob, is just the testing. And I hear some misnomers about this. Well, what's testing do? It just tells you whether you have it or not. Yes. And then that, as you mentioned, if you have it, then you're not allowed to be around. And that's
right.
And that's when you're tested every day, like they're doing in the NBA bubble and with the NFL,
right.
and things like that. It's not just symptoms; they're actually testing.
Right.
And then there's a complaint. Well, there's a bunch of false negatives. Okay, but then they test you again, and then it's, and we can see the results. They're playing.
Right.
They're continuing. Right. And I don't know about you, Rob. I don't know if you follow Major League Baseball that closely.
Yeah.
I don't, but I sure didn't think they're going to get to the playoffs with the way they started. Right. If you remember how Major League Baseball started, it was a mess. And the difference, as you mentioned, you have billionaires owning each of those teams, and it's a product and it's of value to them, literally. And so they're going to make that investment to save that. Whereas, you may get it at a bigger school that might have the resources, or depending, but you go to a lot of schools, there's just not money for something like that.
Yeah, that's going to be a real hurdle. It's going to be hard for the schools to overcome. Now, in sports particularly, because there's no such thing as social distancing in tackle football or on a basketball court. Even baseball, it's not. How do you socially distance the batter and the catcher or the guy on first base and the first baseman? So, I think that we're going to be waiting a while for that contact sports to resume. I think that it's more plausible to reopen the schools, because on a hybrid basis, as they're saying, so that you can maintain social distancing. Look, if King County can resume jury trials with lawyers and witnesses and jurors, judge, bailiff, all of that, by spreading everyone out in the room, which is what they're doing. They've taken over the Maidenbower Convention Center in Bellevue to hold trials. So, I mean, it seems to me the schools, can figure out how to do it as well. But in fairness to them and to the taxpayers who support their local schools, there needs to be some liability protection built in to stave off the inevitable, lawsuits. And again, not necessarily from people who are in the schools to get sick, but people who claim secondary and even tertiary infection related to people who went back to school. I think, Paul, that getting kids back into the classroom is hugely important for the children. Yeah. There's a lot, right? There's a lot of data out there that kids are suffering. They're suffering academically. Some of them are suffering emotionally and physically. Going to school is their escape from very difficult home situations for a number of them. We are harming a significant number of kids by keeping them away from the school building. And I think that we need to get back to where they can come to the school building, even if it's not every day, at least a few days a week.
So if you were representing a school district, so to speak, and you wanted to go and talk with the legislature and say, look, this is what we need to allow us as a school district who cannot afford, and let's be honest, there's not going to be no one's going to be rolling in cash here for the next few years. It's not like there's a big money drop hidden for not only the supposed deep pockets are getting thinner as well as we sit here and speak. What would your requests be, I guess, of the legislature to say, if you really want kids in school and a chance for us to have some type of competition, maybe it's not going to be close quarters, maybe it is going to be track and field and cross country where we can distance in every other lane and do some things like that. And again, Rob, from the start, I have said, it's not about reducing the risk to zero. It's about minimizing the risk as much as you possibly can. Where the complaint was, well, how come we can go to the store, but I can't go sit in the bar? Well, the idea is that you go to the store and in 15 minutes, get your things and get out, reducing the risk, not sitting in a bar for 3 hours watching a football game.
Right.
So in no matter what we come up with, there's going to be a risk. There's no way we can't hermetically seal everything. Yeah. So what do you need as representing a school district in your mind from the legislature?
Well, I think that the legislature and the executive branch have to promulgate guidelines that are clear and they're effective, so that school districts know if they follow them, they're following the best advice. It's based on science, and they are minimizing transmission in the schools as a result of doing that. Number two, they need to have the resources to provide the face masks and the hand sanitizer and the extra cleaning. There's going to need to be more cleaning than ever. And then number three, they're going to need some liability protection, which California has already adopted to protect their school districts and their budgets, and that it's tied to general compliance with all the guidelines that they've been provided. I think that combination of steps will be enough to allow schools to reopen safely, and not only safely for the kids and for the teachers and staff, but safe for the taxpayers too. And that's the combination that you need.
As you know, as we talked the first time, and I put out, it wasn't some thought I was joking. I really wasn't.
Yeah.
I said, I sure hope that with all of these schools and everyone opening, I sure hope that in 5 years our late night TV is not smothered with ads from attorneys. Right. Did you play football in 2020? Because the one thing that the schools really need protection from, Rob, is the future. We don't know the extent. We don't know how this will play out. And so in conjunction with those things, do you also need how informed, I guess, do the parents need to be if you're representing a school district and say, not only that, whether it's in the classroom or playing a sport, parents, you have to know that if you send your child to school and something happens and the school district did everything right, there's no recourse for you. This is your choice of sending the child to school now. Is that play into it?
Yeah, I think that at some point we're going to have to tell parents you're required to send your kids back. Every parent I know can hardly wait. So it's not a hard sell. I mean, my hat's off to everyone out there who's working full time or trying to and homeschooling their kids. That's really, really tough. So I think that parents need to be aware of the risks of sending their kids back. School districts can do a lot to reduce those risks. Ultimately, of course, it's going to come down to a proven effective vaccine. And then we're going to have to make sure that people get vaccinated. And that's not easy because vaccines are controversial, but it needs to happen if the vaccine has been proven. And certainly if your son or daughter is playing sports, you'd be crazy not to get them vaccinated. There's no way they're not going to be sharing sweat and spit and droplets from breathing when they're playing on the court or on the field or the baseball diamond. It's going to happen. So those kids especially need to be vaccinated. And it's not just because you want to protect them, but you don't want them to bring the bug home and infect the grandparents or the parents or anyone else. So it's going to be something we all have to do, I think.
And and maybe you're not aware of this. I know a lot of people don't even think about this, but the average age of an official in this state is about 55. And there have been some polls that have been taken by the Officials Association that maybe upwards of 40% of the officials would not work if there isn't a vaccination or absolutely being assured. I know several that say, look, I'm older, I have diabetes, there's no way, I can't do it.
That's reasonable.
You know, and then you think about other things like the bus. How do you have to, if you have 100 kids that you used to be able to get on 2 buses, do you have to take 4 now, 5, 6? Then who's going to drive it? And are they willing to drive it and things like that? I mean, the questions go on and on, and it's a very difficult situation. But the one piece that I really wanted to get, and you laid it out beautifully here, is for people to understand that schools and organizations like the WIAA makes their living off of kids playing sports. So this is not what they don't want to, this is not what they want to do. They want to be playing sports, but what's an organization like the WIA, in fact, Rob, what kind of position are they in liability? Could they be drug into it with a school district?
That's a good question. I need to research that to see if the WIA is treated like a government agency for liability purposes. It's possible they are. I think they are subject to other rules that govern government, like public records law, for example. So it may be. I think they would have to be concerned about it as well.
And so that's the big thing. Without some type of protection from the legislature, we know that the noise around it. We know kids want to play. We get that. We all know that. But the people, the school boards with the superintendents and their legal representation sitting together, Rob, what are they saying? They're saying we're in a terrible position, but we just cannot take they're either saying we just can't take the risk, or we've got to be very certain about what we're doing here.
Yeah, I know they're talking about it. I know they're talking to the legislature about it. They are very concerned. And, I have to believe that it factors into the decisions that most school districts have made to not reopen at all yet. Yeah,
absolutely. It has to be. There's just still too much unknown. Man, I hope, did I miss anything off the top of that would stick out in this discussion from your vantage point?
No, I think we covered it. I think we covered it well, thanks to your good question. So I feel like we got the basic message out, which is what you were aiming for. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That there's more to it than just, because we do hear this all the time, and I'm sure you've heard it many times in your legal career. Well, they can do it. How come we can't?
Right.
And there's different rules, and in this state, liability is a state issue, and it's not Idaho's issue. Idaho will take care of Idaho, and they'll do as they see fit. And Washington, this is what we have to deal with. And folks, right now, if you're disappointed, or you want some action, or you want someone to do that, I mean, the best thing to do, Rob, is contact your representative and say, look, help the schools out. Make sure that they're not subject to these things.
Right. I think that's true.
Is there a place that they can go, that someone could go to get more information, or do you have anything off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot here if you don't.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if anyone's published anything on this or not.
I'm about to, so.
Good. Well, there you go. You might be the source, the go-to. You could probably look, if you wanted to, Paul, look for some articles about this issue. I'll bet it's been published and somewhere online, because it's a big issue, and as I say, other states are confronting it, and we need to get on the stick as well if we're going to get our schools reopened and ultimately get our sports programs going again as well.
I'll only say it's a sad state of affairs that California can do something that we can't. Right.
Well, on this issue, it's not for the first time. Not for the first. They're well ahead of us on finding a reasonable balance between legal liability and providing government services that are affordable and we actually have the money to pay for.
Yeah, it'd be nice to start putting that money being paid out back into those exact resources that we all covet. Rob McKenna. Rob, now you write a blog, a legal blog?
No, I don't. I do publish articles from time to time and blog posts, but I don't have a regular blog. Frankly, I've just been so busy with my practice, I haven't had time to do that. But I get enough opportunities for interviews, and occasionally we'll have time to write an op-ed or a blog post to get the word out. So.
And so we'd love to, if you'd like to share where you work, and what kind of law do you mostly practice at this time?
Yeah, I do work with nonprofit organizations and companies, and in general, my job is to help them sort through government regulations and laws, and help them with compliance and investigations when those happen, and then some litigation as well when if it can't be avoided. So I have a number of cases that are in litigation as well. So it's a very interesting practice. My law firm is called Orrick, ORRICK. We're an international law firm with a great Seattle office, and my practice is national, but I do have a number of matters here that are Washington State specific. So I enjoy that very much.
Well, my accountant, longtime accountant, would love for more information about nonprofits and how they're supposed to be done.
Yeah.
He goes, I've run into, he goes, when I get a nonprofit file, I already know what they've done wrong. And they do it wrong over and over. And you could probably appreciate what he's talking about.
Yeah.
All right.
I hear you.
I really appreciate your time and your expertise on this. Thank you so much. If there's anything that we can do, our floor is always open, and we'd love to have you back, hopefully talking about, how best can we get, okay, now we've got the legislature, on board. Now what should school districts do?
Right.
Maybe something along those lines. And
yeah, let's see if there's some action in the coming legislative session. We can chat about that.
That would be awesome. Great. Thank you so much. Rob McKenna, you betcha, former state attorney general of the state of Washington, and a lot of great information. We'll be right back. We'll wrap up this edition of the High School Report next year on the Eli and the NFHS Sports Networks.